Okay, I see it's very important for you to be a Jew. If you want, you can go back to be a Jew. So he was elated. He goes back home. He says to his wife, Sarah, he can't believe it. The king let me go back to our religion. Now we could be good Jews. So his wife says to him, she glares at him, she looks at him, you couldn't wait till after Passover? Now you do the cleaning. So Passover is a very exciting holiday for many people. Of course, there's a lot of prep for it, but something very important for the Jewish people. It's a tradition. A lot of our most treasured memories are Passover Seders at our parents and our grandparents. But then we have this year, this big challenge that we're not able to celebrate Passover with so many friends and so many cousins and grandparents. And sometimes people could think, you know what? If I'm not going to have my relatives, I just have to be alone, either just with my spouse or maybe even by myself. Maybe I should just cancel the Seder. There's so many things that are canceled. This will be another thing that's canceled. And this is what we need to really underscore, the importance and value of the Seder. And to realize that this is not something that we cancel. Yes, we have to modify it this year, not to be in, so glorified how it's every year, but we have to make the best out of it. And actually, this might be an opportunity to actually delve deeper into the Seder. Actually, interestingly enough, the first Seder, when the Jewish people were in Egypt, guess what type of Seder they had? They were also quarantined. Do you know that? God said to the Jewish people, there's going to be a plague, okay? And the firstborn of all the Egyptians are going to be killed, but the angel of death is going to be wandering around the streets. And God said to the Jewish people, stay home. Don't go out of the door. Don't go out on the streets. Stay at home and do what? Make a Seder. They were actually instructed to eat from the Paschal lamb and eat matzah. It's an interesting question, which we're not going to go now to all the details about it, but we always know the matzah about that the Jewish people were, when they were leaving, which was only in the morning, they were in a haste and didn't have enough time for the matzah to rise. But actually, they were instructed to eat matzah way before that. Even before they left Egypt, while they were still in Egypt, they were supposed to eat the matzah together with the Paschal lamb. So the first Seder celebrated by the Jewish people was in quarantine, just immediate family. It wasn't no big Seders of grandparents and cousins and relatives. It was just the family themselves in quarantine, getting ready for the exodus of Egypt and just celebrating this freedom that they were going to soon merit. So we actually now are able to kind of go back into the original Passover mode and actually enjoy the Seder. So now, what many times a big part of the Seder is more the social aspect. This year that we don't have the social aspect, it's really time to focus on, let's try to make this a meaningful Seder. And instead of focusing just on the social fun of the Seder, let's actually get to the nitty gritty of what the Seder is and really to internalize a lesson from the Seder into our life. So this is really a kind of like an individual type of Seder that we're going to be able to actually go through the Seder in the right way and try to incorporate and see what is the Seder all about. Where a lot of times we're just rushing for it. There's kids running around and it's like commotion. Okay, let's get to the matzah, get to the fun. But sometimes we don't have the opportunity to actually go through detail, actually study the story, study the lessons from it. So this year, I think this is actually, with all the negative challenges of being kind of lonely, it's actually also an opportunity for us to maximize the Seder experience and try to learn of what the Seder is going to be. Another thing, one of the words that being used very much today is symptoms, right? We're all very concerned about if we or someone around us has the symptoms, right? Now, it's not really the symptoms that we're worried about. What are we worried about? The symptoms is more of an indicator that we have the virus, God forbid, right? So the symptoms is not the issue, but symptoms kind of the way it's expressed, we're aware of it. But that's, if we have symptoms, that's kind of not a good sign. that means we're carrying it. Now, the same thing also in a positive way. There are also symptoms. Hi, Joel. There's actually symptoms of spiritual things, which means that whatever's going on in this world is actually an indicator that there's much more going on in a more of a spiritual realm. And the same thing what happened Passover, the first time that Passover happened, there was miracles. These were expressed symptoms, but these were symptoms of really a greater underlying thing that was going on. There was a special energy of freedom that was in the world, and this was expressed and manifested with the freedom and the miracles that happened at the Exodus. And that's why Passover every year, we know that the calendar is like circular. We kind of come back again, back to the same day every year. So when we come back to the same day that the first Passover happened, it's really, we're not commemorating something that happened in the past, but rather we're reenacting something that happened then and happens every year, which means all the divine energies and the great revelations that happened to our ancestors in Egypt happen now today again. Every year at the night of Passover, there's a great, on air, there's great energies in the air, and we need to tap into those energies and try to make the most of that. And that's what we can always do as a Passover. We can't just do a Seder a week before and kind of have the same experience, because these things are on air only at this time. That's a circular calendar of the way it happened the first time. So really the idea of Passover is freedom. And freedom doesn't just mean freedom from a physical oppression, like the Jewish people were slaves, but we all have within ourselves a certain boundary, certain confines that we are not free. What does it mean we're not free? We can do whatever we want. Besides now we're quarantined. We can't do whatever we want. But generally in life, we're able to do whatever we want, but sometimes we're not able to really be what we really want to be. And it could be either because we're afraid of peer pressure, what other people will think about it, or sometimes we have certain habits that we're kind of very used to, and we don't know how to break out of them, certain inhibitions, certain weaknesses, certain things that sometimes inhibit us from being who we truly want to be, whether it's our true inner personality, whether it's our inner soul, our inner connection to God. And Passover is a time when God freed us physically from the bondage, but also spiritually freed us. And every single year on Passover, God gives us the power to say, you know what, you are free. There's nothing that can hold you back from really expressing and being who you truly want to be. You could be a true Jew, you could be a true person. All the things that you think are holding you back, are inhibiting you from being free, those are all external things. I'm taking away those barriers, and I'm allowing you and giving you the power, the courage to not be inhibited by anything, and to really truly be what you want to be and what you ought to be. Now, another point over here is also about the timing of the Seder. Like we said before, on the holiday, on the night of Passover is when these energies are there. And if we do it a day earlier, a time earlier, we don't tap into those energies. There's actually an interesting parable, metaphor that was given for this, that there was once a poor person that was invited to a very wealthy person's feast. And this wealthy person had a custom that he would invite a lot of people to his feast. And after his feast, he would give all the participants the ability to take something home from the feast. And this wasn't just the food, but also they were able to take from some of the cups or the forks and the spoons, which sometimes were silver and gold. So they're very valuable things. And everyone was able to take home with something, one thing valuable from this dinner. And this poor person was at this dinner, and something really fascinated him. What fascinated him? Before the dinner started, the wealthy person would take out a bell, and when he would ring the bell, tons of servants would come in and bring platters and platters of food. So guess what this poor person took with him after the dinner? The bells. Because if you take the bells, look what happens. The whole feast comes out. So this is the most valuable thing. So he comes home, comes back to his village, and he says, well, I have this unbelievable power, this key, that I just have this, I just ring this bell and a whole feast comes. So you know what he does? He invites all the people of the town to his home. He says, today we're going to have a lavish feast. He invites the whole place to his home. But of course, he has no food in his home to prepare this feast. But he has it made. He knows exactly what to do. Everyone sits down by the table, and this poor man takes out the bell. And he starts ringing the bell, and nothing is happening. And he's saying, 1 second, this guy fooled me. He gave me the wrong bell. Something is wrong over here. When he rang the bell, the whole feast came out. And now I'm ringing the bell. It's not working. So he was so embarrassed. Everyone is there waiting for the food. And he runs out of his home. He runs back to that wealthy guy. And he says, you gave me the wrong bell. It's not working. He says, what's not working? The bell's not, it's not making noise? He says, yeah, it's making noise, but no one is coming. When you rang the bell, there was a bunch of servants that came out with the whole feast. And now I ring the bell and no one is coming. So this wealthy guy had to explain him that you first have to have the feast. You have to have the servants. You have to have the meats. And then when you ring the bell, it's a sign that everything should come in, right? The same thing is also with the Seder. We could have the matzah. We have the wine. We have all the bells ringing. But guess what? If we don't ring it at the right time, we're not going to invite all those energies of the Seder. So that's why it's also important for us. There are many people that do a Seder because that's it. They have kids, they have guests. They don't want to do it late. So they do the Seder early. Now it's where after we change the clock, it only turns dark about 8 o'clock, after 8, most places, right? That's a very late to start a dinner. So people say, let's do a Seder at 5 o'clock when everyone is up and it's more convenient. And they're finished the Seder. By the time it comes 8 o'clock, they're already done with the Seder. But guess what? That's like you're ringing a bunch of bells, but you never really brought in the spiritual energy of Passover, which that's what we're celebrating. It's not just a cultural thing that we're doing by kind of going through the motions. There's really some spiritual energies and special divine connections that we make during the Seder, which brings that freedom to us and freedom to the entire Jewish people. So we really have to do it at the right time. So if we want to start earlier, we could start earlier. We could even maybe eat part of the dinner or something, and we could have nice games and schmooze. And another thing also, a lot of people are talking about making a Zoom Seder this year. Very, very popular concept. But as we know, according to Jewish law, it's not exactly so simple to do a electronic Zoom on the Seder. So what people propose to do is actually do a Zoom pre-Seder, okay? Which means you can start earlier, an hour or two before the Seder, and connect to all of your relatives and all your friends. And you could talk about Passover and, schmooze about Passover. What is that?
The connection's a little iffy. I don't know if it's yours or us.
All right.
What about these Chabad rules? If you happen to leave the camera on before.
So that was a misconception. Some rabbis that wrote out the letter weren't familiar with all of the particulars of it. And later, the chief rabbi of Israel came out against it, said it's not really sound, that type of permission. But you know what? We could do both, like we said before. We could do like kind of the mock type of Seder, okay, before dark with everyone. And then let's sit down when it gets dark and have the real Seder in an intimate way. We could have an intimate Seder with our own immediate family, with our spouses, even by our own. Let's do the proper Seder at the right time. And let's just do the Zoom beforehand. So we can have both worlds. We have the Zoom social connection beforehand. And then we have the real authentic Seder at the right time with the real experience. So that's just a note that I wanted to put through. Okay, now let's go through some of the actual hands-on parts of the Seder. So the main kind of items that feature at the Seder are the matzah, the wine or grape juice, and the items of the Seder plate. Let's start with the matzah. The main idea of the matzah is to remember like the Exodus when the Jewish people were left, the dough didn't have enough time to rise, and we're remembering the story of Passover by eating matzah. Now there's also different types of matzah. There is machine matzah or square matzah, and then there's something called shmura matzah. Shmura matzah is the top quality matzah, not just flavors, which some people might think the other matzah tastes a little better, but spiritually, shmura matzah is a much more of a kind of spiritual quality of a matzah. And in fact, matzah is called the food of faith. There's actually two things about matzah that it talks about in Kabbalah, in Jewish mysticism, that matzah is a food of faith, and it's a matzah is also food of healing, of physical healing. The reason why it's called matzah of faith is because the Jewish people left Egypt. Just imagine you're leaving with your whole family into a desert. Where are you going to have food from? What are you going to live on? Right? Imagine that what God gives you notice within a few hours. You want to pack your bags and go out to unknown place for unknown time. The first thing you think is, 1 second, I need to go to the grocery first and stock up on food. Like everyone is hoarding all the foods because of the corona, right? We need to first hoard and get all types of food ready for this long journey. The Jewish people didn't even think twice. They just ran. What are you going to eat tomorrow for lunch, for dinner? They didn't think twice about it. They said, you know what? God told us to go. He'll take care of us. That's a leap of faith. So the matzah actually symbolizes the faith that the Jewish people had in God, that God is going to provide for them. So matzah is a food of faith. That's why it's not just a physical thing, but actually not just symbolizes the first faith, but actually now too, every time when we eat matzah on Passover, this strengthens our faith. And believe me, we need a lot of faith now. So this matzah is actually, when done at the right time, during the Seder and eating matzah, it's going to be a good tool to strengthen our faith in God. And it also says that matzah is a food of healing. So it also could bring healing, physical healing. So the shmura matzah, the reason why it's called shmura means watched, observed, which means that they watch from the time when the wheat is harvested throughout the whole process until it's grinded and made into a matzah. It's observed that it shouldn't have any contact with water until it becomes into a dough, because the water would make the wheat or the flour rise. That would make it leavened. So shmura matzah means like shomer, means watched. It was watched that no water should have any contact with it until it's made into a dough. The shmura matzah is also usually made as handmade, and that's why it's also usually circular. It's not exactly square like a machine could square it out, but it's actually manually rolled with the rolling pin, and it's round matzah. I'm going to show you over here what a shmura matzah looks like. And it's best that at least for the Seder, we should try to get some shmura matzah. If you need any help finding some matzah, just reach out to me afterwards. I'll help you get either through your local Chabad or through some local place you'll be able to get shmura matzah. It's best to try to have shmura matzah for the Seder. Now, by the Seder, we actually have 3 matzahs that we use by the Seder, because every one of these matzahs, these 3, carries a certain function. So we should have at least 3 shmura matzahs, at least for the center Seder plate. And if you have more people at the table, maybe you might want to have a few more matzahs to be able to share with everyone a piece of that shmura matzah. Besides the matzah, we have the wine. Kosher wine or grape juice. We're going to be drinking 4 cups of the grape juice of wine. Why do we use the wine? So we know throughout all Jewish rituals we use wine. We use wine for kiddush, by Shabbat, by holidays, by weddings, by a bris, every type of Jewish function or ritual. There's always we make a blessing on wine. Why 4 cups of wine? Because there was 4 expressions that God promised the Jewish people. I will take you out of Egypt. I will save you. I will redeem you, and I'll make you into a nation. So we have 4 cups of wine. Now, what is the difference between the wine and the matzah? The matzah is something very simple. It's actually called, like we say in the Seder, poor bread. Very simple, not necessarily the most tasty even. And then we have wine. Wine is something like a delicacy. It's something sweet. It's something tasty. So what is the significance, the symbol of the matzah and the wine at the Seder? So the matzah stands for the simplicity. And the wine is more of like taste and appreciation. And these are kind of the 2 elements that we have in the way we observe Judaism. From one side, we seek to understand and to appreciate all the different things in Judaism, the mitzvahs that we do, the rituals that we do. What's the meaning? What's the significance? How does this resonate with me? That's kind of the appreciation, the taste. That's the wine. The matzah is a simplicity. We know this is what God wants of us. This is what connects us to God. Even if we can't connect it or we don't resonate with this personally, we know it's something good, and this is why we do it. Now, within Judaism, we need both elements, because for one side, the appreciation is obviously something much more compelling. We like to do things that we appreciate and value. But guess what? Not every part of Judaism do we understand and we value. And we can't stop and say, you know what, we're going to pick and choose. We're only going to observe the mitzvahs that we could resonate with and appreciate. We have to also have that simplicity, that devotion that we have to God, that we do things because it's a relationship with God, even if we don't understand and we don't resonate with it. The same thing is with the Seder. Certain parts of the Seder we love, and certain parts of the Seder we might feel is like boring or we don't connect to it. So the Seder is also comprised of these two aspects: the certain parts that we appreciate, we resonate, and the certain things that we just value for the symbolism, what it represents, even if we can't find a specific personal identification with it. And then the next thing we have is the Seder plate itself. And the Seder plate has 6 items on the Seder plate. So we're going to go through the 6 items, see what they are and what they represent. So the first thing we'll talk about is the top 2. What's on the top 2? We have here a roasted chicken neck, and we have a hard-boiled egg. This represents 2 cooked or roasted types of foods that represents 2 sacrifices, 2 things that they brought in the temple. One of them, the neck, represents the Paschal lamb. They would bring a sheep, they would bring it, they would slaughter it, and later they would broil it, and they would eat a broiled lamb, a barbecued, broiled, or a rotisserie lamb. They would eat it on the night of Passover. So the custom is to use something roasted. Either the Chabad custom is to use a chicken neck. Other people use a shank bone or some other type of, or a drumstick or some type of part of a chicken or an animal. In Hebrew, it's called zroa. Zroa means literally an arm. And so the arm would be like the arm of a lamb. Or also the arm also represents, it says that God took out the Jewish people with the outstretched arm. That's why this thing is called, in Hebrew, it's called the zroa, it's an arm. It's something roasted, but we don't eat from it. This is just something symbolic that stays on the Seder plate. We don't actually eat from the zroa, and that's because we don't eat the Paschal lamb today. We can bring. This is just commemorating the Paschal lamb. That's why we don't eat from the zroa. We just keep it as a symbol on the top right of the Seder plate. Then on the left side of the Seder plate, we have the hard-boiled egg. And that represents another sacrifice that they would bring on a holiday for them just to celebrate and eat meat in the holiday. Why do we use an egg? An egg is oval-shaped. And that's like the cycle of life. In fact, there's a custom that mourners, after they come back from a funeral, they eat an egg, a hard-boiled egg. Also, Tisha B'Av, people also eat on the meal right before the fast begins. They eat an egg because of the same reason, the idea of mourning. What are we mourning? We're mourning that we don't have the temple today to be able to celebrate in the temple. So that's why we're remembering the sacrifice they brought in the temple. But because we can't have that sacrifice, we can't bring the sacrifice today. That's why we use an egg, which is oval shaped. There's also another very interesting symbolism of the egg. We use a hard-boiled egg. A hard-boiled egg, the more you cook it, the more it gets hardened to become into a hard-boiled egg. And this also symbolizes the fate and the destiny and the history of the Jewish people, that the more they were oppressed, the more they were persecuted, the more they were boiled, and they went through kind of a boiling process that actually hardened. It didn't melt them, it hardened their resolve to stay committed as Jews and stay through the course. And this, we're going to talk about later, also the same concept we see about the maror, about the bitter herbs. But this is also something we could learn a lesson in our times right now with what we're going through, that the more challenges we go through, that actually is an opportunity for us to become stronger. Then we have on the Seder plate, we have then the middle and the bottom center. We actually have a duplication. We have exactly the same thing on the middle and on the bottom. What do we have in the middle? We have what's called the maror. Maror means bitter herbs. There's different customs of what some people use different things for. Some people use endives. The Chabad custom is to use romaine lettuce and horseradish together, both of them. The reason we have that also in the bottom is because in the Seder, we have 2 times when we eat bitter herbs. One of them, we eat them by themselves. And the second time, we eat them in a sandwich between 2 pieces of matzah, which we're going to talk about later on. Now, the first thing you'll probably ask me is, romaine lettuce, when do we eat romaine lettuce? Many times we eat romaine lettuce in a Caesar salad. Is that a bitter? Is the lettuce in a Caesar salad bitter? No, it's pretty sweet. So why are we eating something sweet and commemorating bitter herbs? So one of the explanations for this is that this romaine lettuce, if you keep it unharvested, if you keep it longer in the ground, it actually becomes bitter. So that's why we take it out early enough, it's still sweet, but if it stays unharvested, it becomes bitter. And this also symbolizes what happened with the Jewish people. They didn't just one day come into Egypt and they were slaves. They actually started off in freedom. They started off getting paid for their job, for what they were working. And only later on, it deteriorated into becoming to slavery. And that's kind of the idea of when something is unharvested, something that might be sweet to the beginning might turn later on to be bitter. Then we have under the zeroa, under the neck, we have what's called charoset. Charoset is a mixture of different fruits and nuts. And there's actually many different customs of how people make this mixture. Some people will use apples, pears, dates, pomegranates, walnuts, almonds, cinnamon, and ginger. Some people use all of these or some of these. The Chabad custom is to use apples, pears, and nuts. And we also put in it wine, which is resembling also, the tears, the blood that was in Egypt, the hardships. So it's actually turns out to be like a paste because the wine gives it that flavor to it. You have it's something it's actually pretty sweet. Some people like that as the most favorite part of the Seder is the charoset. It's actually made, the charoset is actually not made as a dish. It's made just to dip it in. But some people love it. They actually eat a lot of it. But it's made to be a dip. We actually dip the maror, the lettuce and the horseradish, we dip it into the charoset. So this paste that's made up from fruits and nuts and wine, the mixture of the paste actually makes it look like mud, like mortar. And this represents the mortar of the bricks that they had to build with whatever they were building, the pyramids, whatever they were building in Egypt. They had to build brick by brick. They had to make the bricks out of straw and then mortar it with the bricks together. So this also, together with the maror, which is the bitter time they had, we dip it into the charoset, which represents the mortar and the bricks, the hard slavery that they had. On the left side, on the lower left side of the Seder plate, we have what's called karpas. Karpas is a vegetable. And again, there's different customs what people use for this vegetable. The Chabad custom is to use a piece of onion or potato, but really it could be any vegetable. And this vegetable we dip into salt water, and the salt water represents the tears that the Jewish people were crying, in their bitterness in Egypt. Now, why we use the vegetable and what's the significance of it, we'll talk about it when we go through the steps of the Seder. But I first wanted to talk about kind of the features of the Seder, the items we're going to be using, which is the matzah and the Seder plate, and the wine or grape juice that we talked about. So now let's talk about the actual order of the Seder. And the word Seder actually means order, which means that there's an order and a symbol for everything that we do. So we have to really pay attention to appreciate all the details of what we do and why we do it, because every single detail has importance. Now, many times we think, you know what, the main thing is a symbol. Why do we have to follow exactly according to the instructions? But as we see in so many different areas in life, how small details are so important that they make it or break it. Take a simple, if you want to send an email or you want to browse a certain website, if you have one dot missing or one dot extra, you're not going to get the email, it's going to bounce back or the website won't go. Or if you, in sports, if you're 2 inches behind a touchdown, you didn't score. So little minute details could make or break something. And that's why this is called a Seder, which means that there's actually an order of what we do, what goes first, what goes second, and every single part of the Seder has significance. So like we said before, let's try to take advantage that we're doing it in a more smaller company, and we don't have to worry about entertaining everyone, that we can actually do it right and try to go through all the steps of the Seder to our best ability. So let's start now with the order to talk about what we're going to do by the Seder. So the first thing before we start the Seder, the women and daughters and girls light the holiday candles. That's generally every Shabbat, and every holiday is first ushered in by the women, by the females of the household. They're the ones to bring in the light, the beauty, the spirit into the home. So the first thing we do on the holiday, if it comes out on Shabbat, we have to do it before sunset. But if it's at a regular weekday, like this year, it's Wednesday night, Thursday night, anytime when it comes dark, we could do it from sunset as well. But before the Seder, we should start off with lighting the holiday candles, and we should keep the candles either on the table or next to the table so we can actually look and enjoy those candles and that spiritual meaning of the candles. After we light the candles, the first step of the Seder is Kiddush. The custom is actually in the Haggadah that before we start, we actually go through and we just say the words of, it's called the 15 steps. Like it'll have a 12 steps and 7 steps. There's a 15 steps of the Haggadah. So before we even start, we actually just go through briefly and we say what we're going to do. What's going to be the order? So in Hebrew, it says there's Kadesh or Chatz, Karpas, or in English, we'll say Kiddush. We go through all the steps. We first just say what they're going to be, and then we start. So the first step of the Seder is Kadesh. Kadesh means Kiddush, to sanctify the holiday. We sanctify the holiday by making a blessing over a cup of wine. And there's a special blessing we say about sanctifying Passover. Now, we fill up our cup, and something interestingly, a lot of people that are not maybe not be familiar with, the custom is actually to fill up the cup and to overfill the brim. Usually when we fill up a cup of water or we take a shot of wine or whiskey, we don't exactly overfill to spill. We fill it up. Depends how much of a shot you take, a little bit, a half, a full, but we don't overfill it. But there's actually a custom that when it comes to Kiddush, when it comes to making a blessing over wine, we're actually supposed to fill up the wine and overfill it. Overflow. And that symbolizes an overflow of blessings, right? Like blessings without limits. We don't want to constrict only a little bit, small, only half a cup.
Your father taught me that. I asked him during Kiddush why do you make such a mess? He goes, I'm not making a mess. It's on my hand, big deal. He goes, but you want it to overflow.
Exactly. And
years ago.
Exactly. And I always just take it for granted because I'm used to doing it. But it's actually interesting you say, because I have the same question from many students to say, why is he making a mess? Like he doesn't know how to, he's flimsy or something. He doesn't know how to hold the bottle or the cup. And I explain, some people are just, shy to ask, don't even, in their brain, they think, what is this rabbi doing? But some people actually say the same question you do. I have the same questions from, but this is the meaning behind it. It says that wine is a symbol of blessing. And an overflow of wine is an overflow of blessings. So that's why we fill up the cup to overflow onto the plate beneath. That's why you should keep a plate under too. I mean, if you have a silver one, many times you'll have anyway a silver plate. But even if you don't have another cup, you should probably put a plate under it. And so it doesn't overflow all over your tablecloth and everyone else around the table get upset. But we should overflow the cup. Now, drinking the cup, the best is to drink the full cup, or at least 3/4 of the cup, but at least we should try to drink over, so the minimum cup is supposed to be 3 ounces. Okay, well, there's 4 cups of wine. I'm talking about each cup. The minimum size of your cup should be 3 ounces. And we should drink at least a little bit more than half of those 3 ounces. So basically, we should try to drink at least 1.6 ounces, a little bit more than 1.5 ounces of wine or grape juice. You know, if wine is hard, you can do it with grape juice as well. But we should try to drink at least a little bit more than half of the cup. Now, when we drink the wine, throughout all the 4 cups of wine, we also recline, we lean over on our left side. Why do we recline? Because in the olden days, in ancient times, people of nobility, like kings and princes, they would eat and drink very comfortably. They would have couches, and they wouldn't sit at a regular table with a chair. They would sit on couches, and they would lean and kind of relax and drink and eat. So Passover, where we feel as free people, so we also kind of behave like free people and like nobility, and that's why we recline. Many people actually have pillows too, and they recline on a pillow to give them some support and comfort. Actually, they make in many Jewish stores, you could buy a Seder plate, like a decorative Seder plate, like this one here, which says like in honor of Passover. Sometimes they have like embroidered different words or different symbols of the Seder plate. And they have all types of different embroidered Seder plates. Interesting enough, people know how to make some money. You can actually buy a pillowcase that matches your matzah cover. And it says, I wish I actually have one. I don't have one right here. I wish I'd be able to show you. But I have one like that. A beautiful pillowcase that it says on it also. It will say that this night we all recline. Or it would say, Passover. Yeah.
Next year, you should have on the bottom a card saying, if you order now, 1-800-Chabad, we can get it to you before Passover starts.
So anyways, so people have actually pillowcases that they use. They put these pillowcases on their pillow to recline on the left. Now, why do we recline on our left side? That's actually more of a practical for health reasons. And that is because of where our windpipe and our food pipe is. That when we're eating, if we recline on our right side, then the food could go down our windpipe. Our windpipe is on our left side of us. So if we're going to recline on the right side, the food might go into the windpipe. If we recline on our left side, the food will go into our food pipe. So that's why we recline on our left side. And we recline when we drink the 4 cups of wine and when we eat the matzah. So that's the first step. We stand up for kiddush. We drink, then we sit down. We drink the cup, reclining on our left. The next step is washing our hands. What are we washing our hands for? This is something very unique. We don't do this all year. We only do this on Passover. We wash our hands not to eat bread and not for physical cleansing. It's a type of ritual washing because of what's going to be the next step. What's the next step? The next step is the vegetable. The vegetable, we're going to dip into salt water. Now, according to Jewish law, for sakes of spiritual purity and ritual purity, there are sometimes foods that can become impure when they touch liquids. So because we are dipping the vegetable into a liquid, so there's a susceptibility to impurity. So that's why we wash our hands first to cleanse ourselves ritually. Now, during the year round, many people don't do this, and there's really different opinions in Jewish law if it's required or not during the year. But on Passover, we do it, and mainly because of what we want to accomplish with dipping the vegetable into the salt water. One of the interesting reasons why we dip the vegetable in the salt water, besides the symbolism of salt water that's tears, is actually to arouse curiosity by the children, because they're not used to it. They never see this, taking us a vegetable, dipping it into salt water into some water. Maybe you see us dipping fries into ketchup, but you don't see usually putting like an onion or a potato in some water. It's kind of very bizarre. So we want to engage the children in the Seder. In fact, the focus of the Seder is really supposed to be the children. In fact, the whole source of where we learn from about commemorating the Seder, you know where it comes from? It says in the Torah, if your child is going to ask you, what are we doing? What are we celebrating? You should answer him. So the whole idea of the Seder comes from children asking. They're inquisitive. They're asking, they want to know what we're doing, why we're doing it. And that's why we do something weird. Eating matzah is kind of, that's not something weird. We don't eat matzah all year, but it's another type of food. It's a cracker. So eating matzah is not going to really kind of, open up the eyelids, of the children to say, what's going on over here? But we do something bizarre, and we start off, it's the first thing we do. We don't just, sit down the meal and then we do it. The first thing, before we even eat, no matzah, no food, we just do something weird. So the first thing it does is it arouses curiosity of the child. Says, what are we doing here? And you know what you tell a child? Hold on a minute. The next episode will be the Madashtada. You'll ask about a few other things we're doing here that are weird, and then I'm going to give you the answer. But this is kind of to spike the interest of the child. And there's a couple of lessons we could learn from this. Number one is that education is not just about preaching, but it's about creativity. You can't just tell children, do this, don't do that. You need to make it exciting. You need to get them to ask, for them to be curious about it. And that's the way we need to educate children in Judaism, is something they should be excited about, something they want to know about, not just we're kind of just preaching at them, but something that arouses their own curiosity that they want to learn more about and knowing. So that's why we start off the Seder by kind of tickling their brain to try to get them arousing their curiosity. Now, of course, many of us might say, you know what? This year, maybe we're not going to have children at the Seder. I mean, of course, if you're a young family, you're going to have your young children at your Seder. But let's say if your children are in college or they're out working, they might not be home at the Seder. So what kind of lesson could I learn about children when I don't have children at the table this year? But the truth is, this idea of being inquisitive and trying to learn more is not just for children. Of course, the children, it's more common, and this is kind of the nature that children want to learn. But guess what? As adults, we also should always strive to learn. We should also always question and try to learn, what is this? Why is this? What's the meaning of it? What's the meaning of life? So it's not just a lesson to children young in age, but we are all children in a certain way, that we all have more that we could and should learn more about Judaism, about our heritage, and to appreciate more of what we have to learn about. The next thing after we do the vegetable is we take out under our Seder plate in our matzah bags, and actually many matzah bags have 3 compartments for the 3 matzahs. If you just have a basic one, you'll probably just have 3, one on top of each other. But many matzah bags, like the one I have here, do you see here I have 3 layers? It's hard to see there. 1, 2, there's 3 layers. And in each layer, there's a matzah. And these 3 matzahs, actually, the reason we have 3 also represents Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael, the 3 types of parts of the tribes of the Jewish people. So for this step of the Seder, it's called yachatz. Yachatz means to break. We take the middle matzah and we break it into 2. But we don't break it into 2 equal parts. We break it into 1 big one and 1 small one. Like one would be like 3/4 or 2/3 of the matzah, and 1 is small matzah. Why is that? Because the story of the Seder, we want to make it tangible on something on a matzah, talking about the story of the matzah. So we want to talk about the small matzah. Why the small matzah? Because matzah itself is considered like a food of poverty. It's something that slaves ate, something the Jewish people left in haste. And so the matzah itself is poverty. And also a poor person maybe can't even afford or get a full ration of a full matzah. So they only have a small piece of a matzah. So we break it and only use, and during this is a real small part, but what we're going to do during the next part of telling the story, we're actually going to uncover our matzah cover. We're going to keep the sticking out here because we want to tell the story over the matzah. So we kind of keep the matzah out, like this is what we're talking about. This is our symbol our token we're talking about here. So the small part of the matzah we keep in the matzah cover, and later we'll just take it out at certain points. And the bigger matzah, the bigger part of that matzah, what are we going to do with? That's the afikoman, right? We're going to put it aside. We're going to hide it. And the reason why we hide it is not because we want the kids to go find it, but it's actually because we want to reserve it for a later part of the Seder. And we don't want it to get mixed up or eaten up before. So because this is the afikoman is going to be the dessert matzah, after everything is done, after the meal, we kind of put it aside somewhere else. There also became a custom of making a whole game out of it, that we hide it and the children need to find it, and the children get a prize for it. There's different customs about it. Interestingly enough, Chabad, although this is such a widespread custom, Chabad doesn't do this kind of game. And guess why? Because part of this game is that we hide it, but then the children snatch it and they keep it like a ransom. They say, if you want it back, you need to give me a gift, right? So we don't want to educate the children to steal or to snatch things away. So we don't have that custom of the children snatching it. But so there's no really alternative custom in the Chabad just to keep it away. In our family tradition, my own personal family, this is what my father used to do, the way I grew up, and now I do this with my children is, instead of having the afikoman present, we still give the children a present. But guess what? We actually switch it to something else. We call it the manishtana present. Because our custom is that not just the youngest child says the manishtana, but all the children say the manishtana. So we go out, and after the Seder, either during the intermediate days or after Passover, we do buy the kids gifts, but instead of being an afikoman ransom, we actually give them, we call it the manishtana present. So they don't lose out on getting the gift, but they just get it through a different means. That's our personal custom in my own family. But there's many people that have that custom, and there's sources for that, and there's a positive element because it kind of gets the kids involved and engaged. So I'm not going to, criticize and say it's not a good custom. I'm just bring another alternative custom. But again, during the Seder, there's many different customs that people do. Every custom has its meaning and its source, and should be respected. If you have a specific custom that you have in your own family or etc., you definitely should cherish it and keep that tradition going on. So after we break the matzah, we fill up the second cup of wine. We're not going to drink it yet, but we're just going to keep it full for the next stage of the Seder. And that's going to be the what's called Magid, telling over the story of Passover. Now, this is the longest part of the Seder, actually. And that's really the focus of the Seder, is actually the story about why are we here today? What are we celebrating? And like we said before, the way we do it is in a question and answer format. So that's why what we do, the first thing is we start off with a question. Manishtana, these are 4 questions. And these questions address the 4 things that we do special, unique on Passover that we don't do all the year. And there's different traditions about the order of what question goes first. The Chabad has one custom, many other people have a different custom. It's not really important, whatever custom is of the order, but the questions are all the same. Basically, the questions are, the first thing, in the Chabad custom, the first thing is about the vegetable. So the child is asking, why are we dipping this vegetable here? Another question is, why are we eating the matzah? Why are we eating the bitter herbs? And why are we reclining? And then there is a short answer, which is 1 paragraph. And then we elaborate it in great detail. The short answer is the first paragraph that is right after the Manishtana. It's called Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves. And in short, basically what we're saying is that the reason we're doing all these things is to commemorate that we were slaves and God took us out of Egypt. And that's what all these things symbolize. The dipping in the salt water is the tears. The matzah is the liberation. The maror is the bitter time. And the reclining is the freedom. So basically, there's 2 kind of two general aspects to the Seder, the freedom and the hardship, and the contrast of the two. And that's what we're also going to explain soon, what the idea of why we still do the bitter herbs is, because in order to appreciate the freedom, we need to first focus on what the hardships were. But that's the first quick answer, is that paragraph of Avodah Mayinu. Now, obviously the question is, first of all, we're celebrating freedom, but subsequently the Jewish people also were under many other nations and under much persecution. So it wasn't, that freedom was really short-lived, because they were free for a few hundred years, then they again were exiled. So why are we still celebrating the first first freedom when there are so many different subsequent exiles? And in fact, now we're still, thank God, in a time of freedom, besides that we're quarantined. But guess what? People even in the Holocaust also celebrated Passover. And people gave up their lives to eat, to bake a piece of matzah, to celebrate. And even in the harshest conditions, people were still celebrating Passover. And the question is, if they're back into slavery, what's the point of repeating it, of celebrating Passover? And again, also the story is the same story again and again that we're repeating. So why are we year after year going and doing the same thing, repeat? And the answer is, as we just explained earlier on in this class, that the idea of freedom doesn't just mean physical freedom from oppression, but it means spiritual freedom. And this is relevant to every single person and every single time. And even people that were under oppression in the concentration camp, they also physically weren't free, but they were able to be liberated. They were able to be spiritually free. And many of these people were able to survive. And there's a lot of studies about this, that the people that had deep meaning in their life, they were able to survive the harshest conditions because their spirit was free. And even though their bodies were oppressed, their spirits were free. So this idea of freedom is still relevant today, just like it was 3,000 years ago, because we all have within ourselves certain things that we're not free to be who we truly are. And this is what we celebrate, and the whole story of Passover and reliving the experience is to see the relevance, to think to ourselves, how could we go out of our own inhibitions, out of our own confines? How could we find true inner freedom to really be what I really would want to be, and to really express myself and live a life according to what I really want? And that's really what the relevance, and we see that later on the Passover Seder, we say every generation, we have to see ourselves as if we left Egypt. What does it mean we left Egypt? We're not in Egypt. We're in America. Live in a free country. What does it mean we left Egypt? But what it means is a spiritual freedom, leaving our spiritual Egypt. Egypt are the things that confine us and don't let us express us and be a true Jew, be a true person, what we really would love to be, but sometimes we just feel restricted. And today we don't have anyone else that's not letting us do what we want. It's only our own consciousness. It's our preconceptions, our own pre-inhibitions, things that we think we can't do. But God says on Passover, I am going to free you. You're free. You could do whatever you want if you decide to do so. If you want to be a free person, I am going to give you the ability, the courage, the power, the determination. You could do it. So this, like we said before, it's a big part of the Seder. We're not going to go through all the details because it's very long, but I'll just go through a few big points. We have the Avodah Mayinu. We have the 4 sons that we talk about, the 4 different children that we talk about, the wise, the wicked, the ignorant, the apathic one. Basically, what we're saying is that the Seder is for every type of person. It's not just for the goody-goody children, the ones that are curious and want to know. It's also for the apathetic children, the rebellious children. The Seder is there's a seat at the Seder for every single Jew and for every type of personality, every person behavior, for the atheist Jew, for the agnostic Jew, for the rebellious Jew, for the apathetic Jew, and for the one that just wants to do everything. There's a place for everyone, and we have to reach out to each person in their own way. The way we talk to a rebellious child is not like the goody-goody child. We need to engage every single person at the place where they are. Afterwards, there's also a custom. We talk about the whole story about the plagues, and there's a custom that when we say the plagues, we articulate the 10 plagues, we pour some wine out of the cup. And there's different customs. Some people have a custom to put their finger. Some people use the index finger, the ring finger, the pinky finger. There's different customs. they put the finger into the wine and then just like drop it on the plate next to it. Or some people have the custom to pour out from the cup. And the idea of this is that sometimes when it talks about retribution or punishment, it also says that God will pour a cup of punishment or a wrath of punishment on the people that are making trouble, oppressing the Jewish people. So we don't want to partake in this wine of punishment or this wine of retribution. So that's why we spill it out, because that's not what we're going to drink or make a blessing on. So we pour out a little bit of that wine, which is symbolizing punishment, to when we talk about the plagues. Then we have that famous song Dayenu that we sing, which is really saying how appreciative we are to God for all the different miracles he did for us. I would say if God would only do even one miracle for us, it would be enough. But yet he did one thing, a second thing, and a third thing. He did so much for us, and we're so appreciative of that. Then after that, we go through actually one of the most important parts of the Seder. And it says actually in this phrase, we say, if you didn't talk about these three things, you didn't even do the Seder right. So although this part of the Seder, telling of the story, is very long, if we're not able to go through the whole thing, we need to at least choose the most important parts of the story. And that the most important parts are the first paragraph, which is the answer to the 4 questions. And then the next important part is the next, which is towards the end of the story, where we talk about, it says that the explanation of why we have the 3 most important parts of the Seder. So one of them is we talk about the Paschal Lamb, why we had the Paschal Lamb, remembering how the Jewish people left Egypt. We talk about the matzah, why we eat the matzah, the reason behind it. And we talk about the bitter herbs. And the custom is we actually either point with our finger to it, like we say, we point to the bitter herbs, we say, this bitter herbs, why are we eating it? And we give an explanation why. Then we point to the matzah, and we say, this matzah, why are we eating it? Because of when the Jewish people left in haste. And then about the Paschal Lamb, they used to put it on the shank bone, they would point to the shank bone and say, this is the reason why I have the Paschal Lamb. So this is the most important part of the story. If you can't go through all the details of the story, make sure that this last part of the story, where it talks about these 3 things, it will say, the paragraph says, whoever didn't say these 3 things did not fulfill their duty. And it's just 3 short paragraphs. We say that. Then we praise God for all the miracles that he did for us. And we drink the second cup of wine, again reclining on our left. Afterwards, we wash our hands again. This time we're washing our hands like we do during the rest of the year. We're washing our hands for the matzah that we're going to eat. Just like when on Shabbat, before we eat the challah, or even in the middle of the week before we eat bread, we wash our hands in a ritual way. 3 times on our right, 3 times on our left. This is not a cleansing, a physical cleansing. It's a ritual washing. The same too, we also do by the matzah. Incidentally, I forgot to mention that the first time we wash our hands, before we dip the vegetable, we do not make the blessing for washing our hands, because the main obligation of washing our hands is really for the bread, not for the vegetable. So sometimes we routinely do it because we're used to doing that, but this is something unique we do at Passover, that the first time we wash our hands, it's without a blessing. Only the second time, when we're washing our hands for the matzah, that's when we make a blessing on the washing of our hands. And then we take out the matzah. We actually we hold the 2 of the matzahs, the middle matzah, the little piece of the matzah, and also the full matzahs, because when we make a blessing hamotzi on a holiday or a kiddush, we're supposed to make it on something full, like on Shabbat. We first make the blessing on a full challah, and then we cut it. The same thing also, the matzah, if we're just eating the middle matzah, that's a little piece, but we need to make a blessing on something full. So we actually take the other matzahs, we hold the full matzah together with the thin matzah, the piece of the matzah, we hold it and we make 2 blessings. One blessing is the one that we usually make on bread, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And then we have another blessing special for Passover. We say al achilas matzah for fulfilling the mitzvah of eating matzah. And we eat the matzah. Now, the best thing is to eat at least an ounce of matzah, which is about a half of a shmura matzah for this part of Seder. So that little piece of matzah is not going to do the job because that's less than a half. So we have to supplement it with the other matzah, the Seder plate, to try to eat at least a half a matzah. And when we eat the matzah, again, what is that? You're muted, David.
I was going to say, I remember your dad, when he was eating, I think it was the afikomen or some part of it, he was like concentrating, or he had to do it in a certain timed amount.
Right. So ideally, we're supposed
Something
to
along
do
those
it.
lines.
Yes. Ideally, we're supposed to do it very quickly. It's like within 3 or 4 minutes or something to finish all the time. So yes, it's a big exercise to eat the matzah. Number one, it's not easy to eat like eating bread or a roll. But number two, to eat it in a haste, because when Jewish people left, they were in a haste. So also the matzah that we eat, we're supposed to eat it quickly within, a few minutes. That half a matzah.
Like running the mile in 4 minutes, you can't be done. It's impossible.
Yes, that's very tough. It's not an easy thing to do. So we eat the matzah reclining on our left. That's a step of matzah. The next step is the bitter herbs. So we take the lettuce, if you have also the romaine lettuce, if you have it, or if you have endives, whatever your custom is. And in our custom, we use lettuce and horseradish together. And we dip it into the charoset, into that dip we said before, that's made with nuts and fruits. And we also dab some wine in it, which represents also the plague of blood. And we dip the bitter herbs, the maror, into it, and we make a blessing. Now, why do we eat the bitter herbs if we are celebrating freedom? Bitter herbs are remembering the bitterness. So the reason for this is because in order to really appreciate freedom, we first need to think about in order to appreciate freedom, you need to appreciate hardship. So that's why we kind of always go back to that hardship first, and then we appreciate the freedom. Incidentally, just going back to what we said before about the Seder starting it after dark, it's also the same concept. Every holiday in Shabbat, the day starts with dark first. The Jewish calendar starts the night first, like Shabbat, Friday night into Saturday day. So Passover also starts with the night and then the day. And also the symbol behind that is that from darkness we emerge to light. So that's also the symbol of starting Passover, just like the maror and then the matzah, the kind of the contrast of the slavery and the freedom. That's also darkness and night. Also within our life too, we have sometimes these challenges, which are the dark periods, and later comes the light periods. And God willing, also from our current challenge that we are currently facing, we should also come to a bright side of the future. But this is kind of the cycle of the way things work, is that from dark turns into light, from challenges comes to freedom. And that's the contrast that the Seder would keep on going back and forth, talking about the slavery and then talking about the freedom. Because in order to appreciate freedom, we have to first kind of go through that hardship and challenge. That's what the bitter herbs represent. The next step after the bitter herbs is the sandwich. The sandwich is basically we take the bottom, the duplication, the double, the maror, which is at the bottom of the Seder plate, and we sandwich it between two pieces of matzah. And here again, we have that symbol of the bitterness sandwiched between the matzah, which is the freedom. So it's again kind of not just keeping them separately, matzah and the maror, but sandwiching it together to say that from the bitterness, we're going to sandwich it and incorporate, bring it into sweetness. And in that Gada, there's actually a sentence that we say, and we talk about the origin of the sandwich. There was actually a great sage, his name was Hillel. It's actually called Hillel's sandwich. He was the one that created the first patent of a sandwich that we know of in biblical times, in Mishnaic times. He was the first one that invented a sandwich. And it wasn't a peanut butter jelly sandwich. It was a matzah and maror sandwich. So we say that this is what Hillel would do in the times of the temple. They actually had even more tasty sandwich than we have, because they had the meat, the broiled lamb chops together with the two. We only have the matzah, the maror. They had the matzah, the maror, and the Paschal lamb together in his sandwich in his time. Today we don't have a Paschal lamb. We're just left with the matzah and the maror. But that's the next step of the sandwich. After the sandwich, we go, that's the end of the matzah. Then we go to the food, which everyone is really waiting for, anticipating. It's kind of already late in the evening. We have a delicious holiday dinner. But actually, there's actually another symbolic thing that we start off the dinner with. What's the first thing we eat in the dinner? Anyone know? It's something that many people might have forgot about, but there's still something left on the Seder plate. What didn't we touch yet? The egg. The first thing we do, the egg. The first thing we do by the meal is we eat the egg, and we dip it in salt water. And actually, a lot of people like that for some reason. It's actually, they like the taste of the egg in the salt water. Some people, they say, we want another egg, more eggs, not just a Seder from the Seder plate.
More eggs.
Some people love this. I always at our Seder with the students, I always get the Seder, is there more eggs? They like the eggs with the salt water. But anyway, obviously there's a great main dish that comes afterwards, and there's a delicious dinner. After the dinner, we have dessert. What's the dessert? Dessert is a matzah. Why is matzah the dessert? Because the matzah is supposed to be the last taste that we finish our evening with. The last taste in our mouth of the Seder is supposed to be the matzah. What is the dessert? That's the afikoman. The afikoman is the larger part of the matzah that we hid before, and now the kids finally found it. And now we eat the afikoman, and again, we recline on our left when we eat the afikoman. After the words, we do the grace after meal, and we do this with the third cup of wine. And we actually, there's different customs if we fill up a cup for Elijah. Some people do it right before the grace after meals, and some people do it right after the grace after meal. Because right after the grace after meal, we drink our third cup of wine, again reclining at our left. We fill up our fourth cup of wine, and we fill up a cup for Elijah. And the custom is that we actually go out to the door and we open up the door for Elijah, because there's a tradition that Elijah the prophet comes to the Seder of every single Jewish home. And Elijah is the one that is also going to be ushering in the ultimate redemption when the Messiah is going to come. And on the time of Passover, besides commemorating the first freedom of Passover, we also are anticipating the ultimate redemption when Mashiach is going to come. So Elijah, that represents that ultimate redemption. His soul comes and is present at the homes of every Jewish home that's conducted Seder. And it's actually a custom. Many people go out to the door with candles. You actually go with a candlestick to welcome Elijah. And this is a very auspicious time for blessings and prayer. So this is a time that we really a time of meditation and reflection, that whoever goes to the doors, whoever is sitting down at the table, we kind of close our eyes for a moment and really ask God for blessings for anything that we need, whether it's healing, or whether it's livelihood, anything we need. This is a very, very auspicious time when Elijah comes to really put in our prayers. After we close the door, we continue on with the Hallel, which is some other parts of prayer that we praise God and bless God for all of the miracles that he did for the Jewish people in Egypt and all the subsequent generations. And then we take our fourth cup of wine and we drink it, again reclining on our left, and we conclude the Seder with a verse, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, which means next year in Jerusalem, which doesn't only mean geographically we should be in Israel, because even people that are in Israel and in Jerusalem, they say the same thing. Because what we're really wishing for is not geographically to be in Israel, really to live in the ultimate redemption, the time when Mashiach is going to come. There'll be only peace in the world, only good things, no terrorism, no worries about Iran, no terror, no crime, no jealousy. Imagine it, they call it the utopian world, a world which is just going to be only good and only godliness and only an abundance of everything, no plagues, no viruses, no crime, no terrorism, no anti-Semitism. The ultimate dream of what the entire world was created for and is going to get to. So we're asking God that next year we shouldn't be celebrating in quarantine, being scared of a virus that any second is going to creep up on us, but we should live in the utmost freedom, the utmost safety, security, and health. And the main thing also spiritually, we should be having acknowledgement of God in our presence, and no more negative things, only the best to get to the ultimate goal of what this whole world is created for. You want to say something, David?
I'll say an amen.
Amen. Beautiful. So with this, we'll conclude. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But this was just a general overview. And I hope you're able to get some tips, some things I'm sure you were familiar with, and it was just a refresher. Some insights might have been something new. The main thing is that we should kind of take this opportunity instead of just wallowing over, unfortunately, we're not able to have our Seder like we usually have. Let's try to make the best out of it and try to really get and really internalize this great opportunity and value of the Seder with our own, whoever, whether it's alone or with our spouse or with whoever with at the Seder. Thank you very much, everyone. I would have a coach. Yeah. Question?
Well, good night. Thank you.
Amen. Thank
Rabbi,
you.
Moshe,
Thank you.
I had a question. When you were just talking about, next year in Jerusalem, don't we say the same thing, Yom Kippur, after the shofar is blown? Is that coincidence, or is there any connection, or always next year in Jerusalem? Like you always want to be in Jerusalem?
We're always anticipating kind of this ultimate redemption. Yom Kippur is a special holy day. So, what we're saying, basically what we're saying is also, we just come from this holy day, but now we're going back into regular routine. And we're hoping next year will be Jerusalem, that this Yom Kippur will take with us for the entire year. But actually, interesting that you brought that up. There's actually a very close correlation between Yom Kippur and the Seder. The Seder is also just as holy as Yom Kippur. And in fact, there are many people that wear the white robe, the kittel. People wear on Yom Kippur. Some people wear that at the Seder. Do you know that?
I
Some
did
people have
not.
a custom to wear kittel at the Seder. So what we accomplish through fast and reflection of Yom Kippur, we can also accomplish it in an alternative way through celebrating Passover. So that's a very powerful thing in Judaism, that Judaism is not always just about like praying and serenity and being serious. There's also jubilant times and happy times and festive times, and appreciation and the value of joy and celebrating is not any less than Yom Kippur. We call Yom Kippur the holiest day of the year, but guess what? Yom Kippur also comes to the word Kippurim is Kippurim, like Purim. And according to Kabbalah, it says, again, that there's a very close correlation between Yom Kippur and Purim. And what we accomplish at Yom Kippur through fasting, we accomplish at Purim through feasting. So it's unbelievable to think about it, that even from something that you think feasting is something mundane, something physical, it's something far away, a far cry from holiness. But in Judaism, even something like feasting, when it's done in the proper framework, could be something holy and sacred and meaningful, just like Yom Kippur. And the same for the Seder.
Very good.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
guys.
Best to your family. Best to the Gararis.
Thank you. Bye-bye.